Good morning, fellow students. This is Prof. Tabit, and welcome to today's lecture. This lecture is on the conceptualization of research objectives. Okay, due to demands by some students, I've decided to present this lecture. Research objectives seem to be a simple concept during the conceptualization of your research proposal. However, many students still struggle to write a comprehensive research objective. As we may know, research objectives are statements of the specific goals of an intended research. So, if you are drafting your research proposal, at some point you have to write the research objectives for the intended research. And your research objectives should have variables for which you are going to collect data in the data collection phase. So therefore, in this lecture, we're going to look at two major things. The first one will be the components of a research objective. So those are the components that you should consider to include when you are phrasing your research objectives. And then we are also going to look at the basic requirements to ensure that there is data analysis, or to ensure that data analysis is possible right after the data collection phase. Okay, okay. So let's look at prerequisites, right? Before you start to conceptualize your research objectives, you must have fulfilled certain prerequisites. Okay, the first one is that you should have written your research problem statement. You should know in detail the problems that you want to address. After all, we are doing research to solve societal problems and also to address knowledge gap areas. Okay, so you also should have a tentative title and a research aim, right? I'm not going to address a research aim because we said that the aim of your research is to solve the problem. So anything else that you are doing should ultimately result to solving the problems or addressing the research gaps that you've identified in your research problem statement. So those are the prerequisites. You must have done your literature review. You must have uh, written the research problem statement. You should have a tentative title, and you should have the aim of the objective. I mean, the aim of the research. So after that, now you need to write the research objectives. So these are the objectives that will enable you to be able to attain the goal of your research, which is ultimately to solve the research problems that you have identified. Because you can identify research problems and then you phrase objectives that are not in, leading to you solving the problems. Okay. Okay, so the objectives must pave the way to solve the problems. Okay, so now the components of the research objectives. This is very critical. Okay, and I would like you guys to pay attention to see the various facets of your research objectives. These are things that must be included in your research objective when you are conceptualizing or when you are designing or phrase in your research objective, some of these things must be included or considered, right? So I'm going to start from the top, okay? As you may know that when you are writing your research objective, when you want to conduct a research, you must have a research population, right? This is your research population, right? Most often, if in human research or those who are doing animal research or other kinds of research, the problem is usually affecting the population, but not in every type of research, right? So you can see the research population will be the area in which you are going to do your sampling. So it's like the sampling population will obviously come from the research population, right? So you have a population and you need to sample from it. Okay? So when you are phrasing your research objective, there are variables, right, which we refer to as the independent variables. These variables are inherently associated to your population. What does that mean? You can see that in my previous lectures, I've discussed in detail what independent and dependent variables are. But as you can see that the independent variables are linked to the sample, which is coming from the population, the study population. Okay, so the independent variables are the variables that you have that categorize the variables that categorize samples into groups. Okay, so like I'll give you an example. If you are doing a population on humans and then you have gender, gender will be an independent variable because those are inherent characteristics. Okay, gender is an inherent characteristics of the population. So like if we are delivered, you are either male or female, right? So inherent characteristics of the population. So the population has certain characteristics into which the population can be grouped. So that is independent variable. Or for those who are doing biological science, right? You have samples and then you subject them to different treatments. Okay? So that's the second part. So this is the first category of independent variable is inherent characteristics of the population into which your samples can be grouped. Like I said, male, female, right? It could be anything age, right? It could be that is for human population. I mean, if you are doing yeah, all animal studies, human studies, and most of the social science and some biological science, biology studies, maybe you can group trees into species. Then you want so those will be independent variables, inherent characteristics of the population into which the population is divided into groups, right? So you have these characteristics. Some of them are categorical, right? Which you can divide the population into those various categories. So that's one way in which you can figure out independent variable. I've discussed this in other lectures. Then you have the treatments, right? You have samples that are treated differently. So the treatment will constitute your independent variable. So there are two major types of independent variables. Variables which are treatments. So you take a population, you divide them, or let's say samples, right? You collect samples and you divide them into different groups and subject them into different treatments. For instance, you can have a sample that I want to subject into different temperature, I mean different cooking temperature. So temperature will be my treatment. I can subject one group to 60 degrees, I subject another group to 90, and then I subject another group to 120. So you can see that temperature will be my independent variable because I have a group of samples that are treated differently. Okay, so that's another category of independent variable. So by the time you are phrasing your research objective, you should have in mind the variables, right? The independent variables specifically. What will be your independent variables? Okay, this is a classic case. You need to know if if you are dealing with independent variables, you should know upfront. And if you are dealing in independent variables, what are the independent variables that you are dealing with in a research objective that you want to phrase? Okay, that's the first part. Then the second part are the dependent variables. So most people say that your research objective must have variables. That one is a fixed condition. You must have variables. But now you need to zoom into the variables and try to identify which ones are independent variables and which ones are dependent variables. So now we've looked at independent variables. We say it could be inherent characteristics of the population into which your samples are divided into groups. Yeah. And also, or you have different group of samples, you subject them to different treatments. Those are the two main categories of independent variables. Then on the side of the dependent variable, this one is straightforward. All right. Dependent variables are these are the phenomenon under investigation, right? And phenomenon under investigation means that you are going to measure the variables and collect data during and or after the experiment or the survey. So if you are doing an experiment, you have your sample, you subject your sample to treatment, and then you measure something. Maybe you are measuring viscosity or you are measuring tenderness or texture or whatever. So that phenomenon that you collect data during the experiment or after you are done with the experiment will be your dependent variable. And most often is the phenomenon under investigation. So I said here is the phenomenon under investigation here. So one way for you to master these things would be to look at the objectives in published articles, right? Sometimes they put the aim, sometimes they put the goal, but more or less everything is there. In most cases, people don't indicate the independent variables in the aim of the study. They will indicate the dependent variable, which is a phenomenon under investigation. Okay, I don't know what I'm doing here. Yeah, which is a phenomenon under investigation. Then now, the next part will be the action verb in your research objective, in which you are indicating what you are going to do, right? So your action verb normally we should be linked to a kind of a data analysis plan or into an adjective that we insinuate the relationship that you're going to explore between the variables, right? So the data plan or data analysis plan is how are you going to analyze the data that you are going to collect for the variables in your research objective. You should know, okay, if you are conducting a research objective and you don't know how you are going to analyze the data that you collect for the variables in your research objective, then you are not in the right direction. Okay, so this is an important component that you must know before you start to finalize your research objective. So what does that mean? You must know the variables in your research objective, you must know how you are going to collect data for the variables, how you're going to measure the variables and collect data, right? And we know that it could be numeric data and it could be nominal data. Okay, I'm not going to go into those details because yeah, I just want to show you the components of research objectives. Okay, I'm not going to go into the other details. There are other videos that you can listen to. There are other previous lectures that you can go into to understand what are the different type of data, right? You have nominal data, you have categorical data, and you have the numeric data. Okay, so numeric data, normally you have the measurements, right? So you must know how you're going to collect that data, and then you want to know what type of analysis am I going to use to analyze the data. And most often we analyze or we explore the relationship between the dependent and independent variable when we do analysis. This is the classic case. There are some deviations, okay? But if you understand this one, then you are not going to struggle with the deviation. So this is the major part. This is the ideal situation. So if you understand the ideal situation, then you are not going to struggle with the deviations. So in your research objective, you must have a verb like to investigate, to examine, to explore, right? Then sometimes you say, I want to investigate the relationship, or I want to investigate the variations. So the action verb to investigate there, when you say variations, then variation is telling me that you want to look at variances, isn't it? When you say I want to investigate the association, then it tells me that you want to look at maybe regression between variables. You want to look at um, association, like chi-square. You want to look at correlation. So by the time you say you want to explore the relationship, some people will say I want to explore the association. When you say about association, there you are referring to regression. Probably we are referring to correlation. So this action verb that links to the data analysis plan. So when you say investigate, I want to investigate the variation between, or I want to investigate how heat affects the texture. I want to investigate how heat affects the texture. So that data analysis plan, the word that insinuate data analysis there will be affect. So it will tell you that this is a cause-effect relationship. Okay. So you need to understand the data analysis plan. One way to understand the data analysis plan is to look at similar researches, the articles that have been published in the same niche area, and see the type of data analysis plan that they use there, right? And also to identify the kind of relationship that is being explored between independent and dependent variable. Okay, so these are the core components that must be considered before you are drafting your research objectives. So you must know the independent variable or independent variables. And I've said that the independent variables, there are two categories. One is linked to the inherent characteristics of the sample population, right? And the second one is treatment. People who are doing biological science, they do a lot of treatments, okay? And the basis of doing different treatments would be to look at the relationship, how the different treatments differ in terms of the dependent variable. And for those of groups, you just want to see how different groups differ in terms of the dependent variables. And also you can look at maybe how the treatments correlate with the dependent variables or how the treatment associate with the dependent variables. So you just see how the whole things are. So your action verb must link to your data analysis plan, which must also talk to the relationship between your dependent and independent variable. Like I've just said, if I want to look at different treatments and the dependent variable, if there's an association, I can use correlation, right? If I want to see how different treatments associate, uh, I can use regression. I want to see how different treatments associate, you can use chi-square. If it's this one now is a group, if you want to see how if kind of like nominal data associate with dependent variable, you can use chi-square if there are categories there. Okay, for different groups, I want to see how different group varies. Okay, how the mean of different group varies in terms of the dependent variable. So that one is ANOVA. Also, I want to look at how different treatments, like I said, 60 degrees, 90 degrees, 120 degrees, how they differ, how the means of each of those treatments differ in terms of the dependent variable. So you see, once you have that knowledge, it will be very easy for you to phrase your research objective. Please don't phrase research objectives from guesswork or just from using your intuition, because many students they just phrase research objectives using their intuition, or sometimes you just try to write good English sentences, then thinking that you are phrasing your research objective. You cannot phrase your research objective without considering all these components. Okay. Now, if you want to be sure that you are on the right track, after you've phrased your research objectives, you need to try to see if you can extract dependent and independent variables, and also to indicate the data analysis model that you are going to use. Okay? By looking at your objective. If you can't do that, then the objective is not really comprehensive, or it may be wrong. Because when I say not really comprehensive, is that sometimes the data analysis model will be in the indication of the relationship that you want to explore between the dependent and independent variable. And your research objective must have that adjectives that indicates the relationship that you want to explore. Like I want to, and I can say, I want to investigate the differences. Differences is already telling me that maybe I can use ANOVA, analysis of differences, or I can use a T, a T test to look at differences between two groups or two treatments, right? So you can already see all these things in your research objective. If you can't find them there, then it's a problem. You must have an independent variable. You must have a dependent variable. Even if you want to do association, right? You want to see whether there's an association between certain category of groups in relation to the dependent variable, or you want to see whether certain categories or group differ in terms of the dependent variable, right? Or certain treatments, how do they relate to the dependent variable? So your research objective must have all that. If not, then you're probably not comprehensive in terms of phrasing your research objective, or it may be wrong. Okay, so let's look at certain deviations and their consequences. Remember, I told you that I'm giving you the classic research objectives whereby you have more than one variable, right? And whereby you have independent and dependent variable. That's a classic research objective. That's the norm, actually. Okay, so the deviation, you can have at least one dependent variable and no independent variable in the research objective. Some people used to do that. They used to do that. Like you can say, I want to investigate the structure of a leaf, right? I want to investigate the color of nectar. I'll give you a classic example. I want to investigate the structure of a bacteria. I want to investigate the structure of a virus. So you can see that there's only one dependent variable that you are investigating, the structure of a virus, the color of a nectar and stuff like that. So in such variable, it's not wrong, but you should know that you end up either the objective is not complete. So I'm talking now about research proposal. Remember, all of this is about a research proposal. So this is actually a lecture on research methodology with the focus on research proposal. So it might be an incomplete research objective. So you don't have an independent variable. You only have the dependent variable which is the phenomenon that you are investigating. So things that may happen is number one, number one, objective may not be complete. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you only have one set of data, which is descriptive, right? Which makes sense. So if I say I want to investigate the color of nectar, right? If I pluck 3 flowers and then I pick the nectar and or extract the nectar and check the color, I'm only going to get pictures, right? Or diagrams. So you get a descriptive data. So there's no room for analysis. So you see, so those people who are having only one variable in their research objective, chances are after collecting the data, you realize that I can't do analysis. And you will not be able to get a master's degree or an honors degree or a fourth year bachelor's research module or course without doing some statistic analysis. We all know that. So by the time you're formulating a research objective and you're having only one variable there, that is trouble coming for you. Okay. So we said now you know why why we are saying that you must have at least two variables, okay, of which one should be the dependent variable and one should be the independent variable. And please, you need to familiarize yourself on how to distinguish between dependent and independent variable. I have other lectures that these things were explained in. So I'm not going to be explaining them, but I've given you a little bit of a background that independent variables, there are two types. Some are characteristics in which the samples can be divided into groups, right? Or these are uh, 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 groups of samples that are subjected into different treatments or treatments or different treatments that you can apply to different group of samples. That will be an independent variable. I've said that. It's very critical for you to understand and differentiate between dependent and independent variables. I can't overemphasize that. Otherwise, this lecture is not going to make any sense to you. So we said the first case is when you have one variable, or better still, one dependent variable. You find yourself with a scenario where your objective may not be complete. You have one set of data, so you can only do descriptive statistics, like looking at range, like looking at the overall mean, like looking at a mode median, right? And like I've said, that you cannot get uh, your research cannot be approved. You can't pass this research at any level without having statistical analysis. So for you to ensure statistical analysis, you must have at least two variables. One should be the dependent variable and the other should be the independent variable. That's the minimum. Okay. So now, if you have one dependent variable and an independent variable with no groups or treatment. In this case, you can only do association. So I have an independent variable, let's say temperature, right? And I just subject my samples to the same temperature, right? So I didn't have different temperatures. So instead of me using 60, 70, 60, 90, 120, I used 60 for all my samples and 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 measure, let's say, texture. So I'll have one set of dependent variable and one set of independent variable because I did not divide my independent variables into group of samples treated differently or group of samples with different inherent characteristics. So in that case, I can only do association. I'll have one set of data for the dependent variable, one set of data for the independent variable. There will be no groups, not there will be no groups or treatments. So what does this mean? It means that if you state your research objective and you have a dependent variable and you have an independent variable, make sure that your independent variable can be subdivided into can subdivide the temperature into groups or different treatments. Okay. So, but if you don't have groups or different treatments and you are collecting just single data for the independent variable, so what can you do with that data set? You can only do correlation, regression, right? You can also do descriptive, and you can also have picture or diagram. Okay. But the most important thing is that you can only do association kind of data analysis, which is the correlation, the regression, the chi-square and stuff like that, depending on the specific conditions. Okay, so now let's look at the ID case. This is the ID case now. The ID case, you have at least one dependent variable. So you should have at least one dependent variable. This one is fine for all of them. Then you have one independent variable, okay? And then your independent variable can be subdivided into the samples. Samples can be subdivided into groups, right? Groups based on inherent characteristics, and also the sample based on inherent characteristics or groups of samples treated differently. Okay, this all one and two is just basically the same thing. So the first one is emphasize that you have only groups. If you have only groups, there are also some certain statistical analysis that you can use when you have only groups in your independent variable, right? And then going forward, if you have treatments, there are also other statistical analysis that you can do. But what I'm trying to say is that your independent variable, this one, you make sure that you have either treatments or groups when you are doing your objective, right? You have groups or treatments. So you must make sure, you must observe that you have your independent variable is made up of different groups of samples, right? And or the samples are treated, you have batches of samples treated differently. In that way, it will allow you to be able to do differences, to analyze differences, which is analysis of variance, which most students like to use. I'm going to use ANOVA. I'm going to use ANOVA. Before you say I'm going to use ANOVA, make sure your independent variables have got groups of samples or groups of samples that have been treated differently before you mention the word ANOVA. Some students, they'll state a research objective and the independent variable, there's no insinuation whether the independent variable is divided into groups, and they'll just say they'll use ANOVA for analysis. So what would be the basis of using ANOVA? For you, before you say you want to use ANOVA, I must see groups of samples or group of samples treated differently because the treatment becomes the variable. Okay, and also you can do association analysis study with this kind of data. So I just thought that I should explain these things so that when students are about to write their research objective, they should know that certain components must be taken into consideration. Okay, so let's see examples from published articles, but I've tried to tweak these examples so that they are not word for word, um, like those in the sources, in the various sources. Okay, so now let's see the first one. It reads, to evaluate the antioxidant activities of ribose tea extracts from different suppliers. Let's check it out. First thing first, what are they going to do? They want to evaluate. That is the action word. And in my head, evaluation means that I will have a group of things, and then I'll compare them, right? To see which one is the highest in terms of marking an assignment. You want to evaluate the students. So you want to know who are the top achieving, who are the low achieving, who are the median achieving, what was the class average, and stuff like that. In my head, that's what evaluate would mean to compare them, right? So to evaluate the antioxidant activities. So this is the phenomenon under investigation, antioxidant activity. So they're going to measure antioxidant activities, right? So this will be the dependent variable, the DV, right? My writing is not that good here because I'm just using the mouse. Okay, then there will be, the samples will be ribose tea extract, yeah, samples. So ribose tea extract samples. So samples identified, right, in the objective, which is good. Dependent variable identified, action word. This is the action word identified. So I just put AW there. Action word identified. Then um, ribose tea extract from different suppliers. So what would be my samples? My samples will be the ribose tea. So now I need to identify my independent variables. Remember, I said your independent variable must link to the samples. And there are two things that you're looking for. This is my sample. There are two things that I'm looking for. I'm looking for groups of samples due to certain inherent characteristics or treatments, right? The treatments in which I will use to treat different treatments that I will use to give me different batches of samples treated differently. So if I look at this, if I go further in the sentence, I'll see different suppliers. Oh, so different supplier is not a treatment, so it's going to be different groups, right? So it will be group of samples from different suppliers, isn't it? So different suppliers will be our independent variable, IV. So this objective is a very good objective. So I can see from this objective that, oh, so antioxidants, ribose teas from different suppliers, then I can already think about doing an analysis of variance to check differences in the mean of antioxidant activities. Yes, I'm going to compare antioxidant activities, which will be the mean. And then evaluation means I want to see which one is the highest, which one is the lowest, what is the average, and stuff like that. then statistic analysis is possible in that research. So this is a good research objective. So, oh, I don't know what I'm doing there. We'll go to number two, to investigate. Okay, they want to investigate. That is the action word. Investigate, investigate, investigate. What? The proximate composition. Okay, proximate composition is like you those who are doing nutrition studies. You want to see the total carbohydrate, the total energy, and total. So I'll just take one of them. Maybe we want to see the total crude protein, okay, of wild watermelon juice extract, okay, from different plots. So this maybe you can just see different farms. Maybe they are doing a kind of agricultural research. They are growing wild watermelon from different plots. Different plots may insinuate different manure, or maybe they treated it differently, but yes, limited to different plots. So plot A, plot B, plot C. So I can also see that proximate composition is the thing that I'm going to conduct experiment on. After my experiment, I'm going to get the proximate composition, which is dependent variable. Same with the one above. Antioxidant activities will get the value after our experiment, isn't it? Yeah. So, and it is the phenomenon under investigation. So it makes it easy to identify the dependent variable, right? So now our sample will be white watermelon juice extract. So if I read the sentence, I see that the samples are coming from different plots. So it will be different group of samples from different plots. So different plots automatically becomes our independent variable. So this is a good objective. It becomes our IV. Okay, let's look at number three. Three also still has evaluate. To evaluate the food safety knowledge of food vendors in Johannesburg, right? So they want to evaluate. So remember I talk about evaluate means you want to compare, you are going to calculate the knowledge, maybe by giving them some kind of a food safety test, knowledge test, right? So food safety knowledge will becomes our DV, dependent variable, because that's what we are going to measure after our survey, right? And of food vendors. So the sample will be food vendors. So this is sample. Now, from our sample, I want to see whether we have groups or we have treatments. It is not indicated in this research objective. So is this research objective wrong? The answer is no, it's not wrong, but it falls within, I think, our deviations. We said that if you have only one variable, then you have one set of data. So I'm only going to get food safety knowledge data. And I can only do descriptive research. I mean descriptive statistics by looking at the mean, the mode, the median. Is that going to help? Can you pass your research by doing only that? So you see that this student was supposed to provide some form of groups. Maybe we say food vendors of different bio, social biography, yeah, from social biographic environment or different backgrounds, or male and female street food vendors that will render your samples into groups, or maybe street food vendors trained and untrained that will also render your samples into group to make way for statistical analysis. Remember, I told you that your independent variable make way for statistic analysis, right? So if you don't have a well-defined independent variable, because here I'm having only samples, but there's no defined independent variable. So therefore, you can only do descriptive statistics. This is a classic example. So this is not a good research objective, or it is an incomplete research objective. But when you look at the aim of papers, that's how they normally used to state the aim of a paper. So this will make a very good aim of a paper. rather than a research objective. This is number three. Because the aim of the paper, you are just trying to say the what the you are trying to say what you want to do in terms of the problem. So maybe they want to evaluate the full steps in knowledge because you normally have three objectives for, and then maybe one objective will be to find solution, But you first need to know the state of the full safety knowledge, and then before you can work out other objectives based on solutions. Or maybe the problem is that no one knows about the full safety knowledge, so you are doing a research to get that information. So maybe that is the problem you want to solve. So this is a good aim, but it's not a good research objective. We look at number four. Okay, this person want to assess and evaluate in the same direction, right? The consumer acceptance of modified green tea. So what are they assessing? They want to assess consumer acceptance. So after I've done the survey, so this one looks like a sensory analysis kind of a survey or a consumer test survey. So this will be my dependent variable because after I've done the survey, I'll get data on this one. Okay. Or after you've done an experiment, but experiment is for experiment, right? When you do laboratory work, but when you're looking at people, it's normally a survey. So after a survey, you will get that consumer acceptance data. So consumer acceptance is your DV. The sample, right, will be you have green tea, right? Green tea extracts, right? That will be the sample. Now, let's see, do we have groups of samples? Groups of samples, yes, we do. Different plant species. So different plant species will be our IV, right? Okay, so that one is a good research proposal. That one is a good. Let's look at number five. To investigate. Okay, what do they want to do? Investigate. Investigate is not a good terminology for an objective. Normally, it should be in the title, right? Normally, it should be in the title. Maybe here you want to, maybe you want to determine the effect of salt on the volume of banana loaf would be an objective, right? So instead of using investigate, you can say to determine or to examine. Okay, but anyway, they want to investigate the effect. So here we see what are they trying to do? They want to examine the effect, right? Effect. So even if you move investigate, you can say the effect of salt on the volume of banana loaf. You can see that is even an objective, you know? So it's effect of salt, yes, effect of salt on what? The volume, on the what? The volume of what? Banana loaf, right? So when I do my research, what will be my sample? My sample will be banana loaf. Okay. Then what am I going to measure? I will measure the volume, isn't it? So my volume is my dependent variable. After I do all the experiment, put salt, put everything, I'll measure the volume. So volume is my dependent variable. So now we need to try to sort out what is the independent variable. Okay, but there's banana loaf and salt. So banana loaf, salt will be put into banana loaf. So this is salt becomes what? Treatment. So this is the first case where we are getting treatment. So you are treating banana loaf with salt. So we'll probably have, you can't, if you take only one maybe we are using different amount of salt. But if you take only one amount of salt and treat the loaf of bread, then you have independent variable that is not divided into treatment or groups, right? Like we said, so you will only be able to do correlation. So yeah, maybe they're supposed to say different, the effect of different amount of salt. Yeah, different amount of salt now would have given us treatment. The amount of salt, maybe amount one, amount two, amount three, amount four, will be the different treatment. So this one is not properly written, but for those who are in the discipline will understand that, okay, effect of salt will automatically mean different amount of salt, right, on the volume of banana loaf. So you have different set of banana loaves treated with differently, in the sense that we treated with different amount of salt to make the research objective complete. So sometimes they may say the effect of salt, but for those who are in this discipline will know that effect of salt means for you to get an effect, to study an effect, you must use different amount of salt, right? But even if you put it there that I'm going to investigate the effect of different amount of salt on the volume of banana loaf, it's still okay. That will even be more precise. Okay, so I hope these examples are stimulating some thoughts in you. So this is the end of the session. Okay, colleagues, I will advise you to listen to the other lectures so that you know much more about independent variable, right? For those who are struggling to understand the concept of independent variable, okay? So you can go there and listen to the other lectures, and also just to understand um, the role of sample groups, whether it's groups due to inherent characteristics of the population or due to treatment. So it's very important to understand those concepts before you can attempt to write your research objective, and also just try to understand that there will be some words, some descriptive word that will insinuate the relationship between the dependent and independent variable in your also in your research objective. I wish you all the best. Thank you for coming. Bye bye.